this week. That's where the treats are. Did you make a cake for this week? Oh, well, the week is not over.
I know there's two. Great. It feels like it's Friday. It's not a long week. Already.
It's 3 o'clock. We have another first. We vote on that. Is that a motion? Chair. Pause for a second. I think I saw her. I think I saw her coming in.
Oh, did you?
Let's do it. That's good. Oh, Suzanne. So you had a council meeting. That's cool. What you doing?
Hi there. Good to see you. Great.
Okay, well, everyone.
Hey, I'm here.
Okay, we've got Robert Melvin.
You can't see me, but you can hear me.
Amy Walter, Suzanne. We have one of the main top. Get our new town manager, Jason Burrell. I'm sorry. As well as Barry and here in the middle of Clerk Appreciation Week, or clerk. So I thank you all for being here. Let's just take a moment, please, and reflective silence. Okay. The next item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. And do I have a motion to approve the agenda? We'll share this. Do I have a second for approving the agenda?
Second. I seconded.
All those in favor of approving the agenda?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The agenda's approved. The next thing we got is the minutes of our February 9th meeting, which were circulated via email. Anybody got any? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Motion from Jane. Do I have a second? Second. Second from Walter. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next, we've got old business. First thing that I wanted to do for today's meeting is to talk about where we are in our funding right now. So that we all have as clear, and nothing's ever clear about the bridges. but it's clear of a grip on where we are in terms of funding as possible. As we, I think, mentioned at our last meeting, and I need to consult the minutes, but what we found after the first of the year, and I think by the time of our February meeting, was that although we anticipated the possibility of some additional county funding, some recreational grant that Barry had applied for back in 2020, beginning of 2022, that we may have some of that money in addition to the MPO LAP grant money that we knew we were getting. And we, the commission, members of the commission met with various members of the county commission. At the end of the day, it's clear we were not going to be getting, at least from the grant that Ben had applied for in early 1922, we were going to get no county funds. So at this stage, we have approved funds from one source and budgeted funds from the town. The approved funds from one source is the LAP grant. And I circulated a memo to everybody. And the amount of that grant is for $191,000. But it basically boils down when, in terms of construction funds, to $124,000, $125,000, somewhere in that range. Because coming out of that money is first, the town has to kick in a percentage, 20% total. So that's out of our pocket. And then there are approximately 15% in fees and inspection costs that will be run through NCDOT and or the MPO to do all the paperwork that's connected with this grant. It comes through the NCDOT. There is a definite amount of paperwork involved. It does cost money to do that. We could do it internally. It probably costs us more, and we aren't really set up to do it. So MPO and NCDOT are working on setting up for it to be handled by them for a fee that's seems a lot, but it's reasonable under the circumstances, or so I'm told. So we've got a net of 124 or 125,000 roughly LAP grant funds. Then we've got our own budgeted funds and the amount of $101,000 that's left in this year's budget. That assumes that also assumes in the 23-24 budget, we include $38,000 as a copay. So we could take that $38,000 off of this year's, but this is the most favorable looking at it, and that's assuming we spend $38,000 in next year's funds. There's total funds available of $225,000. That's without getting any more money. There are some ARPA funds available, but those may end up going to other places. I don't know if the commission hasn't really talked about. Jason, I know there's some thoughts about putting some of that money aside for future road construction, I think, but there's been no decision on where those go. So they're floating out there, but certainly we can't count on them for the bridge necessary. Does anybody have any questions about the funding? Sure. You need to get up to the mic, please.
This thing working? Good. On. Okay, so the idea behind the bridge construction is I have a meeting next week with individuals from the MPO, which is Municipal Planning Organization, and also to DOT to figure out the idea, because when Ben was here, the engineers came back with 4 options and it was going to cost $10,000 to explore all of those. In talking with them, I don't know, and Barry, you can elaborate however you want to. I don't know if that's necessary. My goal is to pick a plan, propose it to you all, and then we get this project done, because it's been a long time coming. So the issue with the federal funding is they don't pay for the covered bridge project part of it.
We're gonna get to that, Jason.
Okay,
Okay, I mean,
Okay.
just, I don't wanna cut you short, but you're going into the agenda. You're
Okay,
getting ahead of
I'm
me
sorry.
on the agenda. No, that's
Okay.
okay. That's okay.
okay, no worries.
All right. Okay, so that's the status of grant. So that's everything, that part of old business. Is there any other old business to come before the committee? None, then I want to go to new business. And the first, which gets to where Jason was talking about, getting the four alternatives, is to discuss the current bridge condition and its impact on the currently approved plans that were submitted with our video fund. But you know that the council has, we recommended and the council approved plans a couple of years ago. And what I need for, and again, Jason, didn't mean to interrupt you, but this group needs, I know I needed to be walked through this and understanding it, and so I suspect they need it too, to really understand where we are. The original plans that we approved, or recommended the town approved, included, and it anticipated that bridge being built several years ago, 2019, 2020, a drainage system that was, if you go and then look, and I found it on the fences, the drainage system that was behind the abutment to the bridge. The abutment is the stabilizing place right there at the bank and the head walls. That was in the abutment. But there was a drainage system that was to be installed there to preserve the abutment from further decay. And so when the bridge wasn't built in 2020, which was sort of the anticipated time, no drainage system was installed, obviously, behind that abutment, because it was a part of that project. As a result of that, the bridge abutment has deteriorated markedly, dramatic. And we had and I sent this to a package, we had an inspection done June the 6th, 2022, which showed a lot of additional repairs that needed to be made. Barry then met in January with an engineer type from the MPO when we had an on-site meeting. At that point in time, Barry was told there is no repairing the abutment. It has to be replaced. Is that, he's shaking his head yes. This was in January. Barry has since had the Mattern and Craig come out, and a representative from them has come out, I don't know, probably in February or March recently, confirmed. So what I'm telling you, this is what you need to grasp. Before, we had plans to repair the abutment and repair the bridge. Okay. The world changed. The abutment needs to be replaced, not repaired. The abutment can't be effectively repaired. When you replace the abutment, you have to remove the bridge. Before, the bridge didn't need to be removed. You could just plug and play in the abutment and repair it, and plug and play on top of the bridge. Nothing has to. That's not the world. The world is the bridge will have to be removed, which means the surface will have to be removed from the bridge. All of the support, the metal supports, steel supports will have to be removed. It'll all have to go in a pile on the side of the ball. And the abutment will have to be rebuilt, and the bridge will have to be rebuilt. And we could or could not use some materials from the bridge, but it would in effect have to be designed, redesigned, and rebuilt, stick built it, from scratch. So that's the essence of this item number one of new business. The plans that we have approved, the plans that we paid for, are no longer useful in any sense. It's difficult, but that's what it is. We have plans for repairing an abutment and repairing a bridge. We have to have plans for a new abutment and a new bridge. Okay, so, as Jason mentioned, could you give us an estimate of how much? Oh, could you give us an? I don't, Tom, I don't know. We will have to look back. I think it was in the $40,000 or $50,000 range, but that's my old memory. I'm not sure it was around 30,000. I've seen some minutes where we were talking about it with them with it. But in any event, it's not their fault in the sense that they identified in the plans themselves that drainage, a drainage system needed to be put in place behind those abutments in order to prevent their further deterioration. The fact is, it didn't get built. And 3 years later, what I don't think any of us realized, they didn't, but I don't know that I can fault them, is the deterioration without anything, would just accelerate the way it did, but it did. So the next step is before our March meeting, I assume after Barry had talked with the fellows from Mattern and Craig. Mattern and Craig approached us with 4 alternatives, or actually gave Ben a memo with 4 alternatives for a redesign. And a quote of $10,000 to do a study of which of these 4 alternatives would be the best. Okay. That caused some chagrin for a couple of reasons. We're in the midst of our interim town manager leaving and a new town manager coming in, and they're interfacing with the engineers. None of them have the history we have, or even with the MPO, which Tom Widmer had been working with directly, and probably more, frankly, more knowledgeable about that than them about that grant. But in any event, at the end of the day, the 4 alternatives really didn't match up with our reality. 2 of the alternatives included, actually 3 included incorporating a cover over the bridge as part of the construction. What we found out in February, after one of the other things we found out as a result of that February meeting, and I've sent you some background information on it. We found out from Hannah Cook of NPO that the LAP grant would not fund the cover for the bridge, essentially phase 2. It will only cover what we were describing as phase 1. So the alternatives several of the alternatives that Mattern and Craig were proposing were just, they weren't starters. That's not what we really need. I had a conversation with Mattern and Craig, a conference call with 3 members from Mattern and Craig, and I've written a memo to you folks, which I think I sent to you, and essentially it describes that. And there's Jason fortunately has set up a meeting. There's one critical issue before we move forward that needs to be addressed. That is whether or not the LAP grant funding that we do have will fund a pre-engineered bridge. And let me just share what I've learned in my conversation with the engineers, Mattern and Craig. It's going to have to be re-engineered, as I've said. the cost of re-engineering the bridge and the cost of the bridge itself will be significantly cheaper. The total cost maybe almost half as cheap, but certainly significantly, I would say a significant amount of money by using what they refer to as a pre-engineered bridge. Now, that means that the firm, and there's a firm in South Carolina that builds these bridges, they've got their own staff engineer, they're familiar with how they all fit together, and they can quickly and relatively inexpensively engineer and seal plans for the bridge using their materials, which are pre-cut materials. It's not a prefab bridge. It's not fabricated off-site, but the materials are pre-engineered, pre-cut. They're delivered on a trailer, and then they're built on site. So the key is in that bridge construction, which is markedly cheaper than stick building it ourselves again. Is that covered by the LAC grant funding? There's some question as to whether it is or it is not. And so that's a key piece of information that we need. And hopefully it will. If it does, then that's going to be a great deal of savings for us. If it doesn't, this bridge could be really very expensive and beyond, frankly, our means at this stage. So, and I don't say that lightly. I'm assuming we'll figure out a way to skin the cat, but whether we can use this LAC grant funding, which is $125,000 construction, is critical. If we don't have that, our $100,000 in the bank ain't going to build a new bridge from scratch. Did I ask a question? Sure.
Can you hear me? Is it, do we have, the worst case scenario? Say it's not approved. Can we just build a simple walking bridge such as is further up the creeks, way up, up Graybeard, something like that? What's the worst case scenario here?
Tom, yes, we can do that. It's my understanding, Barry, and I like we get Barry to confirm this. This is off the NCDOT's vehicular list, so it's not under their jurisdiction. And we can build a simple walking bridge there, but that doesn't mean we won't have to, in any case, remove the existing bridge, which will not be cheap, and design a new bridge, no matter how small we make it, and build that new bridge from scratch.
Can I speak to a little bit of what Tom was talking
Sure.
about? Sure. Arbor Lane Bridge. We're all familiar with it. This bridge that we have on Texas could potentially be the same scenario that we had in Arbor Lane. There's a couple of things we're not wanting to trigger. We're not wanting to trigger a new flood study. And there's a couple of things we need to meet. One being the location of the abutment you're talking about. The other being the elevation of the I-beams that are under the bridge. As long as we were to go back and not alter any of that, we wouldn't trigger a flood study. If we put something above it, like we did on Arbor Lane Bridge, above the abutment or above where there used to be an old vehicular bridge crossroad years ago. And as long as we went above that, we'd never trigger the flood study. So this prefab bridge, we could put it in place there on Texas Road, just like we did on Arbor Lane, and actually leave the abutments and let them do what nature does and never trigger anything. That's something that we've kind of got to keep in mind in keeping with building something like the Arbor Lane Bridge. And yes, this is pedestrian. This is not, it's completely off of the list of our DOT bridges. So we could do something similar to that. I think Jason has found something real similar, and you were speaking to something similar to it too. So we just gotta be sure, and talking with all the engineers over the past, is we gotta keep triggering all these new studies that we've already done years ago, so. But the Arbor Lane Bridge is really close to the scenario we're in.
Questions?
Yes, sir.
The Arbor Lane Bridge isn't covered, but
It
this
isn't
phase
covered,
one
but
wouldn't be covered.
I'm basically talking about just
Yeah.
your bare bones, what we've got to keep from triggering all these new studies, all these new costs.
Barry, what is the width of the Arbor Lane Bridge?
I'm about to say right now it's 5 or 6 feet.
I've walked it. I've never-
So the existing, so regardless, do we have to replace the buttons? Or are you saying no? That we wouldn't have to?
Yeah, we wouldn't have to. We could actually leave the old timbers, the abutments in place. Step back, just like we did the Arbor Lane Bridge, and we talked with, Matt and Craig.
It's one of their alternatives to build the new abutment rather than replace the existing abutments with concrete, go behind it.
We could step back.
And then build the abutment there. Your bridge has to be a little bit longer because it's got to stretch out further to get to those abutments.
If we step back, give that situation, if we were to step back 6 to 8 feet past the abutments. Have them engineer some new abutments in, steel, concrete, what have you. That allows enough time for nature to take its course, any decay, any part of that just to fall away. And it can do that without any consequences to us or at any expense. And that protects the concrete abutments. Yes, and that's exactly what happened at Arbor Lane. You can still see some of the timber abutments under that bridge.
So if you do a pre-engineered bridge and we put a cover on it, or is that something,
We'd have to do that later.
And I think
but
that's,
is that something if they're engineered that it can be done later?
So it can be done. And so what we're talking about is just the bridge itself with the MPO federal money. That's all that's paying for. But the pre-engineered bridges also have covered bridges, covers that we could put on there. So the idea of what Barry was talking about, the abutments are going to continue to deteriorate. So the idea from the engineers and what Barry and I have talked to is go outside of that. Make concrete pillars for those I-beams to sit on. So they'll be here for another 100 years. Because if you recreate what you have currently, they're still going to deteriorate. So preservation of life, go wider, make it more solid, make it more structured. Still get your same bridge. It's still probably going to be 12 feet. Is that what we were looking at? A span of a pedestrian bridge, and then have a covered portion of top of it. That's the best scenario that I know of in talking with the engineers. Very few.
Yeah, once you talk to the engineers, it's clear that there are 4 scenarios. There's really only one.
Yeah.
And that's to do a prefab bridge going back with the abutments. And that's the most cost effective. And that's the only one we can frankly probably afford.
And the pre-engineered bridge is going to last far past any of us. Just say, like Mason was talking about, what your existing abutments are. They've deteriorated so bad in 4 years. Why would you go back and redo that again and spend the same amount of money and they're going to be gone in 20 years? You're going to have the same problem. But the pre-engineered bridges look like normal bridges. They can be covered with 2x6s. You're going to have planks all the way across. It'll look beautiful and you won't know the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be, you won't know it's pre-built, prefab.
Barry, I seem like I remember you mentioning something like this 2 or 3 years ago.
been doing some little bit of research and talking to a couple of contractors and to address the demolition part of it. Since we're not getting down into the creek, or, if we were to decide to leave the we could actually set up in house and actually remove the bridge down to grade. To where we could leave the abutments in place. We can actually do the demo. So that. you know, be a concept.
We can't, we'll see what, part of the problem is. The MPO, NCDOT is gonna wanna control this, they may not want you.
And that's a possibility, that is true.
So we don't control all of these things.
And I also have a meeting next week, like I was mentioning earlier, with DOT, figure out their palette for the idea of a pre-engineered bridge. I've worked with them for many years. They work within the means of what project you're trying to accomplish, so I don't think it's removed from possibility, but I would like to find out from them and then report back to you, and send it out.
So it sounds to me like there's really nothing to decide. It's for the MPO to decide if they accept prefabricated or not. That's basically where the decision.
That's right, until we know where
And
they
then-
stand. with the
And then if there's, we've gotta go with whatever is assured of passing. Whatever is the longest lasting, whatever is the cheapest and whatever, what most beautiful too. Those are the criteria. But it seems like we only have one choice to put all those factors into.
Well, we have one choice going with the existing,
Bridge, but not the cover.
well, the existing funding.
But
Um, Let's say that they said no to that, to a prefab bridge. Sort of back to where we were a couple of years ago. We didn't have funding then either. We talked about raising money for something. that we have.
That's correct. If they won't do that, we'll be back to square one.
Well, I think the idea behind that is if they don't like that option, then you are back to what I've studied up on the project, replacing the abutments, which is still going to be your phase one. So last I saw it was $80-some thousand to replace those abutments.
Current plan you have, if you remember, we put it out for an RFP. And I got one response from down on the coast. Without the abutment, that 80,000 is correct. Without the abutment repairs, we were $317,000 is what the bid came back at. You add the 80,000, Jason is just talking to. 400. $400,000.
It's a big number. Repairing and replacing. Two different
So-
things.
Yeah, that
You know,
changes a lot, thinking about that.
I think after all these years, all we want is what is the simplest solution to get us a pedestrian bridge?
And I can do that. I can get you a bridge. I can get you a pedestrian bridge. And it may be a prefabricated bridge. I'll get you a bridge. And it'll look like a bridge. You won't even know it's a prefab bridge.
And
I
if you
feel very confident in that.
if you could add a cover later, that option makes that sound good.
Okay.
Just want to.
Yeah.
We're getting older. So,
No, I really, I think if we can get through this committee with the idea that a prefab, it's easy. They bring it on tractor trailer, they span it, you won't know the difference. It's gonna be a little bit longer too, so that works for everybody. If we can get that done, that's a win. And then the town can look at the option of the covered part of it. That may be something that we look at, Mason Jane, that we look at in terms of that's our portion of things. Because the same prefab companies that do the bridges also do covered bridges. So the more information I can get from them, once I find out from the DOT whether they'll allow it, we'll all be more educated.
And we can get them, I assume, Jason, to pre-engineer the top at the same time they engineer the bridge.
They will.
It would be
Yeah,
integrated.
it'll be a complete
And
project.
we'll have a number for both too, so.
Right.
The prefab offers a lot, but we're gonna do a prefab top anyway, so this is just doing a prefab everything.
Yeah, you'll never know the difference. I've looked at some of these models. They look great. You would never know. It's not maybe your 6x6 seaters. But it's a 12-foot bridge, looks very nice. It's covered. Pedestrian bridge. There's no need to worry about vehicular traffic, emergency traffic going over and under it. Because it's not rated for that now, because it's not a,
So, since we did spend some time in the past talking about these, would we have some decorative bollards? included?
we can do some decorative bollards for you.
We
after the
won't
fact.
need bollards.
You won't need them.
We won't need bollards. no.
Time we did studying them.
I know a rock mason. He
Alright.
built some stuff around the posts.
Well,
I'm just trying to get this bridge
I
done.
want to say, I really appreciate Barry's wisdom on anything related to this project. So whatever he says, I think is probably as informed as anybody.
Stand on. What the land grant says is we can use the buttons. Except. So there is option.
So what I'm hearing is that we're all going to prefabricate and hope that they approve.
We don't have a
That's it.
choice. We don't have a practical choice.
The idea would be, let me work with the MPO and DOT, and Mason, I told you, I emailed you that I have a meeting next week, hopefully, and he's gonna be a part of that. And so we'll learn more whether that's something that they would approve. I don't see why they wouldn't. They've done it in many different other locations.
But even if they don't approve it, it sounds like that's.
You still
where
gotta
they're
do it.
going Anyway, is that right?
That's the best option in my,
Is that what you think?
There's no question. You know, we're gonna have a prefab bridge. So that shouldn't bother anybody. Because that's all we're gonna be able to afford.
and also too, with the funding stuff, they want it to last for a long time. And a lot of them get squirrely in terms of like our existing abutments. You're like, okay, well, you're gonna patch that? Great, how long is that gonna last? So the fact that we're proposing something better than what a lot of people propose is in our, behooves us and is our benefit.
Sounds like progress.
Yeah.
Again, it's key that the meeting Jason set up with the NPO, getting them to sign off. And they will need to sign off on totally new plans. I mean, they've got plans in their folder now. And we're gonna have to say, you can ignore those. We're gonna give you new ones where you still, you know, this is our grant approval still count.
And we will have to probably get new plans engineered for that prefab bridge.
Yep.
And that's the hard truth of it. And it's not anything I want to tell you, but that's reality. But at least with that idea, we have something to work with in terms of going with deteriorated abutments that we can't make a decision on. If we lag another 5 years. So it's gonna come with a price, and I'll be more than happy to report to this board about that, obviously my board. But you're gonna be better off doing it that way. I feel confident.
What's the time frame now to have a bridge up? When do you realistically think, given all these things? will happen?
Okay. So next week, I hope to have a meeting with DOT and our funding agencies. What I'm going to recommend to the board is, because we haven't spent that money in this current budget year, overlap that into next budget year. So we have that funding earmarked for that. Find out in NCDOT what their parameters are, if they're accepting of that. And this is not a big project. It just has a lot of different pieces to it. I would say in a year and a half, long run, you'll have a new bridge. That'll be covered. That's my expectation. That's what don't hold me to it, but
Other question, and in that year and a half, will we also have a park that fits in with the bridge?
Right, I think we'll talk about the part next. We'll stick to the agenda. We'll just focus on the bridge. But any other questions on the bridge part? All right, thank you. Sorry.
One thing I like about the plan as it's been changed is I like a greater length of the bridge. I think it'll be look very nice. And I, have a little bit of concern about that, abutment falling in, but it's gonna fall in no matter what I think. And so,
It's,
There it is. You see it? The pictures? Isn't that it?
it's the crossing, just below, West Virginia. Paris, what's in the Graybeard? It crosses over there, over to, to behind Kentucky Road. Okay, so the bridge behind the extension of Kentucky Road comes around. Yeah, behind his little house. Yeah. Any other questions about the bridge? The cover again is phase 2. Really can't talk a lot about it right now, but we're gonna have to fund it separately. Maybe we get town funds, maybe we still have to raise it.
Let me ask you about
We know
that.
some numbers, we just don't know.
But if you are building, like we were hearing that the prefabricated, they doing the bridge, they're also considering the second phase, the roof. Is that right? So in that study, we're already paying for the study of the
We'll see
roof.
what we get. Well, you can say that, but until you get the MPO to sign off on just what's in that or not in that.
Yeah.
They can be just they can have a very narrow way they look at it. And you just sort of have to do it their way. But that's what logical, yes. What do we do with logical? But in any event, we certainly will be able to, the same company that engineers the bridge, with the engineer to cover it, they will have it in their mind, maybe sheets of some of the things that don't show on the same piece of paper. We'll be able to get the engineer. And that will be efficient. And again, with a pre-engineered bridge, I was told by Matter and Craig, that Matter and Craig won't even engineer the bridge. They'll just engineer the buffers. So we won't pay Matter and Craig for the engineering bridge. We'll pay the bridge company, and they can do it for about 25% of what Matter and Craig. So we are going to re-engineer the bridge, but there are some savings out there to go into. So, is Josh, do we have Mary Weber on on Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to report to everybody that Mayor Helms suggested we start talking with the landscape architect about the part that we have all anticipated over the past several years, building of this bridge, since we do seem to be coming up with some sense of imminency in the bridge's construction and beginning to design that part. And in addition to the park itself, what members of the committee have talked about in the past, has also been some, sort of memorial with Dr. and Mrs. Spring. Not that there might be more memorials in Mont Street, but that this would be an appropriate location to locate a memorial, to reflect as much as they have meant to Mont Street, during their lives. So we had that meeting with Mary Weber, about 3 weeks ago. The mayor and Tom and I met with her, and she's going to be working up some sort of proposal, and we're particularly with the latest funding information. We'll need to discuss it further, but we do want to move forward with park design at this point, or at least getting in a position where we can maybe get park design in next year's town budget. And that would be helpful. And that would include some sort of more. Let me bring up for discussion. Anybody have any comments on building a memorial in conjunction with the park?
I do. First of all, is the park going to be on both sides of the stream or on one side? And if it also, if to think about incorporating the path that goes by the tennis court behind, because that's real low down there and always gets flooded, and to make a real nice, from a nice bridge to a nice path sort of thing. And I think there are different opinions about, I think there will be different conflicts of opinion about the type of a memorial. In my mind, the park itself is the memorial. And we don't need statues and preaching and things like that. Other people think that we need some kind of statue or something. And I think that we have to have that in the back of our mind, what this committee suggestions are. You know, if we're going to leave a place for some sort of statue of Jesus. Yeah, a plaque is what we were thinking, but other people have ideas.
I know that, which is why I brought the subject up, because I think Mary is listening to us. I don't think she can talk to us because of the way Zoom is set up, but, and let me just mention that Mary, so everybody knows, is very familiar with this one. She was designed Robert Lake Park. She's designing the town.
Here you go.
She's designing the town's new, revisions of the columbarium area just behind the gate. She's working on that right now. So she knows Blackwood, Royal Lake Susan, better than any landscape architect there is. So she's aware of I'm sure she's aware of that. And Tom, I think, from the mayor and Tom Widmer and my conversation with her, we are talking about both sides. This town owns land on both sides. We would look to incorporate that to something. And there's some issues, and she'll need to talk with Mary and Jason and others about how we fit in the pump house there and all of that in there. But there's area there to have a nice park. Walter, did you have any comments about the memorial also in the park?
You could have roof on one side and
They gotta be on the same side.
Suzanne?
I think a nice plaque would be.
I agree, Suzanne.
And I was interested when we were talking about the path going down. you know how it's always mucky and muddy? Is that our space, the town? Do we have that space or is it MRA? Okay.
Have you talked to anybody in the family about
No,
this idea?
but somebody does.
I've talked to Gigi.
That's just the grandparent. I mean, somebody on that side of it, one of you two need to spearhead that up. Decide who does it and report back to us.
What's the issue? I mean,
No, I mean, well, I think we need to talk to them about,
whether they want a statue or. a plaque.
well, whether they favor
Oh,
that
sure.
having the plaque, and then sort of what scale. I mean, I would think, knowing the people, well, the things that you said, Tom, and me about Mrs. Spring, but they would not want anything
Yeah.
extravagant at all. But they would probably think of it. No.
Well, they have one over Ridgecrest, but somehow Gigi was telling the story of one of the grandchildren behind the truck carrying the repaired. And they say, oh, there goes Daddy. Granddaddy. But I don't think they would want this. But I'll check the.
Okay. Is there any way that Mary can talk over to see if she has any questions or things she'd like to? Mary, if you've got any questions with of the committee about the park or park design that you'd like to ask, can you unmute? And I think maybe we can get you to be able to ask questions.
Okay, I unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to provide a proposal for this park and memorial. I think it'd be a great project. And yes, I'm just trying to get a better sense of what people had in mind about the memorial, because I'm having a hard time coming up with a proposal when I don't feel like I have a very good grasp of that. And I think somebody talking to the grandchildren would be a great idea. Just kind of get a sense of what they're thinking. And I was out there for the meeting at the town hall a few weeks ago, and then Tom Widmer and I walked around the park a little bit. And one idea was to maybe shift, if the bridge is going to be more narrow than it is now, maybe shifting it over a little bit towards that memorial path, which would, and then reconfigure the road a little bit, which would create a little more space for the park. So I think there's some things like that we can look at. And I need to get a sense of like how much parking is required at the pump house. It's kind of like a little circular drive there now, semicircular, and we thought maybe close off one of those entries and just have one, and then again would give us a little more space because it is a very tight area. And another thing is I'm still needing some any kind of survey information that's been done in the area. That would just help in putting together a base map.
Mary, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. No, I don't have any survey information on that.
Okay,
I've looked in our records and everywhere else I've called the county. I don't have any other survey information other than what's called the GIS.
okay. So are the engineers also just working off the GIS?
Correct. They've never done surveys on, they haven't done any surveys
Okay.
on Texas Road Bridge or that area.
Okay, all right.
Full survey.
All right. So yeah, so I guess my main question is just what Mason brought up earlier is just kind of scope and ideas for a memorial, whether it's just, a plaque on a boulder or some kind of statue or an archway or, something like that.
Could you run down that list? Boulder?
Like a boulder with a plaque,
Uh-huh.
a statue. I'm not so sold on the idea of a statue because I think there's probably plenty of statues already of him. I don't know about her, but maybe some kind of
Arch.
arbor, maybe some sort of dedicated garden space that is dedicated to them.
Did you, what about, you said something about an arch, is that to the bridge or something like that? or-
Yeah, or just kind of to the entry of the park. And really, I'm completely open to people's ideas because, I want it to reflect the community. And, and of course, the Grahams.
Okay, anything else? Jane?
Speaking on the park, and I guess this affects landscaping. One thing that since Barry and his group have sort of made it look much better last summer, people have been using the picnic tables that are in that area. And I think that would be a nice thing to be able to continue with, having some place where people can sit and picnic.
Yeah, I completely agree. And maybe some benches, things like that, because it is a really beautiful creek.
And I think we do need to look at the going down to the creek there, because that is, as Walter and others have mentioned, gets real slow.
Yeah, and I think part of it's because it's an old road that's gotten a little bit buried by mud. And so it's impervious, the water's just hitting the pavement and sitting there. So it seems like it needs to be regraded to make it higher so it's draining better.
Anything else?
I don't think so. I haven't really spent a whole lot of time out there looking at this specific site. So I'm just kind of trying to gather ideas now and see how people use it. I understand that the path is very important and it's used a lot. I did see people out there using it. The picnicking is great. And the path extends, from the tennis courts and then beyond. I think we can, like I said, capture a lot of space by reducing a lot of the pavement, which I think would really help improve it. But, one question I had is just like how much parking might be needed for the community. It sounded like not much at all. So that would be great if we don't, because that just allows more space and more flexibility to do some interesting things there. Are there any particular community needs that you see that this could help fulfill aside from like picnic tables?
There be a bathroom somewhere or not?
Bathrooms are expensive to build. Public bathrooms are expensive. But
I think one of the best things there is that you have that huge, big parking place where the old post office used to be, right close to there. So if anybody uses it, you don't really need to park there.
right. Mary, that's what Tom Frist here was saying, that area where basically the old post office and general store used to be, that parking area is probably can be all the parking that's needed for the park. And there's some parking on the other side of the bridge too, so.
Okay. And I guess another question is about the pump house. Just are there some requirements that I need to know about in terms of like how?
Barry, you want to talk to Mary? This is Barry Kreisman, who is in charge of all of our public works and knows.
Okay.
the pump houses.
We just have to keep in mind that that is a public water source and there are limitations as to what we can do around that well. As far as materials. 100 foot around that well, we have to maintain sort of a control to protect that wellhead.
Okay,
But there are some things that we can, use and not use, and we also have a 24-inch retention tank that runs from that well out into the ball field that's 60 feet long.
Hmm.
Be sure, be careful on our grading and everything that we have to do right there.
okay. Is that mapped out anywhere so I would know where that is roughly?
It is not mapped out, but I can show you.
Okay,
So we'll
yeah,
have sometime and walk through the side.
okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Then you could, and when you talk about that 100 feet, what is allowed within that 100 feet?
There's as long as we're not, like asphalting or parking cars, stuff like that, the parking area really concerns me, right around that area. So as
Okay,
long as we're using something, like mulch and gravel, items of that nature, we should be good to go.
okay. What about trees?
The trees should be good.
Okay,
I can actually arrange us a meeting with our, state inspector. And they can walk through some of the
okay,
strenuous rules and stuff that we need to maintain around it.
all right. Yeah, one thing that Tom and I talked about when we were out there was maybe trying to screen the pump house a little bit, with some vegetative material.
We can do stuff like that or rock veneer it. We've done several of the wells that way. To
Okay,
blend in. So yeah, there's several options there we can do for the well.
okay. All right, yeah, that'd be helpful. I think once I get like a preliminary base map put together, just based on GIS, then it'd be great to meet with you. And, great, thank you. I don't think I have any more questions, but if anybody else has any more comments about the park and memorial, yeah, I welcome them.
I have a comment. This is Robin.
Okay,
When you were talking about options in the park for the Grahams,
mhm,
I too feel like a statue is probably not appropriate,
mhm.
but if you could incorporate, I just love the idea of some little small garden, and then you could also incorporate, a boulder or a rock or something. The only thing about the arbor is, if we do a covered bridge, you don't want to try to compete maybe
Mhm.
but you can probably come up with a creative arbor that wouldn't. But I thought if you did of course, a flower garden, you have to keep up. But the idea of incorporating maybe the plaque with something like that, as long as it doesn't take up the functional space for the gathering, because I think that's probably very important for all the people that use the field and the park and the strollers and families and all.
Mhm.
But anyway, that's just a comment.
Yeah,
But I
okay,
think those are all great ideas that you came up with.
thank you. So when you talk about gathering, so you mean the people that are using the field, and so maybe to try to keep this site pretty open?
No, I just meant gathering as far as having enough seating with picnic tables and benches,
Okay,
so that the memorial doesn't dwarf that
Yeah.
space.
yes.
And I know that you have a creative way of incorporating that. The other thing is, I'm sure you'll get into materials, if they're quote picnic tables for the long haul, maybe they need to be, something that's weather resistant. Or I don't know what other kind of materials you might be thinking about for benches, but we'll be curious to see what you come up with.
Okay, great.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary, let me just, I don't know if I mentioned this in our prior meeting, but you should know that during the summer, this bridge is used there's a lot of traffic in this bridge going from residential areas on this side of town, using that bridge to cross over to get to the park, and also the club the club assembly areas that are right by the park. So you've got a lot of the club traffic, the kids just assembling and going home at the end of the day and then back and forth for lunch too. And then you have the actual club groups when they're coming to the ball field to play or to the field across from the post office. They're using that bridge as well as just the down Alice's path. So it's a particularly, it's not super busy this time of the year, but for 8 weeks of the year, it's a really busy area in terms
Okay.
of traffic.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know.
Okay, anything else for Mary? All right.
Thank you.
Very much for joining. Is there any other new business? Is there any public comment? Do we have any announcements? Huh? You almost always.
No, I wanted one more thing for Mary is, one of the great uses of the park, I think, will not be only picnic, but just to sit and look at the street. So I would have some places for kind of meditation there.
Good comment.
There is that one bench that's on the path that starts going around the ball field, and I see people all the time, and I've sat there many a day.
Okay. Any announcements? I'm not gonna set a next meeting date yet until we sort of talk with the MPO and sort of find out where we are, because that will impact just when we need to get together again. But I'll let everybody know, and advise everybody of the results of that. Anything further?
Well, I just wanted to say that your memos and your correspondence have been very helpful.
Huh?
Because to come in here and have that background really helped.
It's a long, complicated story. I know we get a little dose of it you guys get a little dose of it every 2 months, and it's sort of hard to keep up with just what happened and didn't happen. But we are where we are. We got to build a new bridge. We got to build a new abutment, and we're just going to figure out the best way to do it. And with Jason's help, we will hopefully get it done.
I thank you for getting a dose of it about every day. We get it 2 months.
All right, do we have a motion to adjourn? Suzanne moves, second.
Second.
Jane seconds. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Robin, for zooming. Thank you, Mary, for coming. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Barry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mason.